My name is Elise. I'm 28 years old, and I grew up believing I was sick. Not emotionally unwell or a little off. I mean medically, physically, undeniably sick. My parents told me I had a rare condition that affected my energy, my immune system, my heart. It changed depending on the year. But the message never changed. I wasn't normal, and the world was too dangerous for me. They never said it with cruelty. They said it with soft voices and worried eyes. They wrapped me in warmth, fed me caution like medicine, and built me a life so small I could barely breathe inside it. I didn't go to school past third grade. They said I was too fragile, no sports, no friends who asked too many questions, no sleepovers, no part-time jobs. I didn't even have a real doctor, just one they knew personally, someone who signed forms and nodded a lot. For a while, I believed them. How could I not? When the people who raise you tell you something is wrong with you, you don't question it. You just adapt. You shrink yourself. You become what they say you are. By the time I was 18, I'd never gone anywhere alone. I didn't even know how to drive. My mom said I might faint behind the wheel. My dad said the stress would be too much. So I stayed home. I learned how to cook, how to clean, how to take care of everything. Except myself. There's this moment I remember. I was 20. We were at the pharmacy and my mom picked up a prescription in my name. Something expensive. I asked what it was for, and she just smiled. "It's for your heart," she said. "You don't need to worry about it." I didn't ask again. Looking back now, it's ridiculous. But when you're raised inside a story, you don't know it's fiction until something tears a page out. And that moment, the tear, came 2 years later. A letter. An insurance claim. A number I wasn't supposed to see. And suddenly, all those locked drawers and whispered calls made sense. They hadn't just told the world I was sick, they'd gotten paid to say it. For years. But I'll get to that. This isn't a story about one lie. It's a story about a lifetime of quiet manipulation, of love used like a leash, of being made small so someone else could feel safe, or in control, or wealthy. And if any part of that feels familiar, if someone in your life ever told you that you weren't capable when you were just inconvenient, you'll want to hear the rest. Because I didn't stay small, I didn't stay sick, and I didn't stay silent. If you're still with me, go ahead and click that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes to the surface. This is only the beginning. Growing up in my house was like living in a padded cell disguised as a nursery. Everything was for my safety. The filtered air purifier in every room. The special diet that somehow never included things I liked. The weekly rest days where I wasn't allowed to leave my bed, even if I felt fine. My parents never punished me, not in the way you'd expect. Their control came wrapped in care, in sighs, in quiet pity. My mom had a phrase she used whenever I asked for something normal. "You don't want to push yourself and end up in the hospital again." The word "again" carried weight. It made it sound like I had nearly died before. A dramatic episode I somehow had no memory of. When I asked what happened, she'd always say, "You were too young to remember." Or worse, "We don't talk about that." So I stopped asking. My dad didn't speak as often, but his silence was its own kind of threat. When he disapproved, he didn't need to yell. He'd just leave the room and stay gone for hours. His presence in the house had a gravitational pull. We all orbited around his moods, his rules, his needs. Even my mom, who ran the daily operations of my supposed illness, deferred to him when things got serious. At 16, I started to feel things didn't add up. I wasn't getting sicker. In fact, I rarely felt bad at all. Tired sometimes, but who isn't? When I mentioned this, cautiously, almost guiltily, my mom would pat my hand and say, "It's the medication. It's working. Don't mess with it." What medication? I didn't even know the name of what I supposedly had. They never told me. When I pushed harder, they became softer. Like I'd hurt their feelings. "After everything we've done to keep you healthy, how can you say that?" My mom would whisper. And my dad would just look away. Disappointed. Like I'd failed them by trying to think for myself. That's how it works. When you're raised in a system built on silence, you internalize guilt for wanting answers. They controlled everything. The internet was monitored. I didn't have a phone until I was nearly 20. They said I'd get overwhelmed. My clothes were picked out for comfort. I wasn't allowed to dye my hair, wear makeup, or drive. And when I asked why, it always circled back to the same story. I was delicate. My body couldn't handle stress. My mind couldn't take too much stimulation. My world had to be kept soft, controlled, limited. The strange thing is, I believed it, until someone else didn't. It was during a free health screening at a local job fair. My mom didn't want me to go. She said those places were full of germs and I'd catch something. But I'd started pushing more. I told her I just wanted to look around, not apply for anything. She reluctantly agreed, as long as I wore a mask and came back in an hour. There was a booth offering blood pressure and heart rate checks. I figured it wouldn't hurt. The nurse was kind, chatty. She asked if I had any known conditions, medications, or diagnoses. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. I didn't know what to say. I realized I didn't actually know the name of a single thing that was supposedly wrong with me. I told her I thought I had a heart issue. She asked what kind. I said I didn't know. She asked what medications I was on. I said I didn't know that either. Her brows lifted. Not judgmental, just surprised. "You should really get a copy of your records," she said gently. "You're an adult. It's your right." That sentence stayed with me. It's your right. No one had ever said that to me before. That I had a right to know what was happening inside my own body. And that was the first crack in the wall my family had built around me. I wasn't supposed to hear it. That's the thing about eavesdropping. It always feels like an accident until it isn't. It was a Thursday afternoon, mid-autumn, the kind of day where the chill sneaks in through the windows no matter how tightly they're shut. I had come home early from the library. I told my mom I needed a new book. Really, I just needed space. Time away from the walls that somehow always felt too close. When I walked through the front door, no one heard me. That wasn't unusual. I'd learned to move quietly in that house, a habit that came from always feeling like I was too loud for a life that was supposed to be quiet. I heard my parents in the kitchen, voices low but firm. I didn't mean to stop and listen, but I did. Something in their tone told me I wasn't meant to be part of this conversation, and that made me freeze. "I told him she's stable," my mother said, her voice clipped, businesslike. "Stable's not the word they want," my dad replied. "They need to hear that she's still dependent." There was a pause, paper rustling. Then my mom again. "She doesn't even ask anymore. It's like she's accepted it. And she needs to stay that way," my dad said. "They don't continue disability if there's improvement." You know that I felt my blood run cold. Disability? He wasn't talking about someone else. He was talking about me. I leaned closer, just enough to hear the shuffle of envelopes, the tap of a pen. Then my mom's voice again, softer this time, almost tired. "We've built our life around this. If it stops, she'll be fine," my dad cut in quickly. "She doesn't need to know anything." We've kept it stable this long. I stepped back before I even registered I was moving. My mind was loud, louder than it had ever been, thoughts crashing into each other like a stampede. I walked out of the house and didn't stop until I hit the edge of our property. I don't remember what I looked like. I just remember the air in my lungs felt colder than it should have. They were lying. They had been lying, not just about the condition, but about the money. Money they were receiving because I was sick. Because I couldn't work, couldn't function, couldn't live independently. And the worst part? They were right, in a way. Because I didn't know how to live without them. They had raised me not to. That night, I didn't eat dinner with them. I said I had a headache. My mom brought me tea and touched my forehead with that same look of endless concern she always wore. But I couldn't meet her eyes. Because now I knew what it really was. Not love. Not fear, control, investment. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering every moment that had felt off. Every birthday where I wasn't allowed to blow out candles in case of exertion. Every time they'd stopped me from applying for jobs. Every document they filled out for my sake. It wasn't protection, it was paperwork, a performance. And I had been the star without knowing I was on stage. The next morning, I looked in the mirror and asked myself something I never had before. What if I wasn't sick? That question terrified me more than any diagnosis ever could, because if I wasn't sick, then the life I had lived wasn't real. It had been chosen for me, engineered, and if that was true, then what else had they taken? I didn't confront them. Not yet. I didn't scream or demand answers. I'd lived too long in that house to think confrontation would bring truth. Instead, I did the one thing they'd taught me never to do. I started paying attention. I watched. I listened. I waited. Because something inside me had shifted. A quiet anger. Not the kind that explodes. The kind that simmers. The kind that plans. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing. For weeks, I said nothing. I played my part like I always had. The quiet daughter, the cautious one, the girl too delicate to dream. I still took the vitamins they gave me, still nodded when they reminded me to rest. I still smiled when my mom rubbed my back like I was a porcelain doll. But I was awake now. Every time they handed me something, a pill, a form, even a hug, I looked closer. I watched their eyes, their hands, the pauses between their words. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized how many things I'd accepted without question. Like the locked cabinet in the hallway. The one I'd been told was full of old medical supplies and important papers. Or the fact that my mom handled every doctor's appointment over the phone, and always alone. Or how I never, not once, saw my own medical records. At night, I thought about that nurse at the job fair. "It's your right," she had said. And I started to wonder, what if I just asked? So I did. One morning over breakfast, I said it casually, like I wasn't holding my breath. "Hey, do we have a copy of my diagnosis anywhere? I need it for a form I'm filling out for a local program." The silence that followed was instant and loud. My dad didn't look up from his paper. My mom froze mid-sip of her coffee. It was less than a second, but I felt it. Then came the overcorrection. "Oh, honey," she said quickly. "You don't need to worry about all that. I've got it covered." "What kind of form?" I shrugged. "They just want documentation." "For support services." "Well," she smiled tightly, "we'll take care of it. Just give me the form, and I'll send what's needed." That was the moment I knew. There was nothing to send, because there was nothing to prove. I didn't push. I just smiled, stood up, and left the table. But inside, my chest was pounding. Not with fear, with clarity. It was like watching a magic trick in reverse. Once you knew where to look, the illusion unraveled. A week later, I scheduled my own doctor's appointment. First time in my life. I told them I needed a full physical and to request access to all my historical records. I didn't ask permission. I didn't tell my parents. I walked there alone, heart racing, palms sweating, like I was sneaking out of prison. The doctor was kind, asked a few questions, took my vitals, ordered blood work. But when I told her I'd lived with a chronic heart condition my whole life, she frowned. "There's no record of any diagnosis," she said, scrolling through her screen. "Nothing that would match what you're describing. Not even any prescriptions tied to your name in our database." I blinked. "What about other doctors? Maybe I was seen privately?" She nodded. "It's possible, but if they submitted anything to your insurance, it should be on file." "And it's not." She paused. "Can I ask, who usually schedules your appointments?" "My mother," I said quietly. The silence that followed was different from the one at my kitchen table. This one was heavier, realer. "We'll run some tests," the doctor said gently. "But based on what I'm seeing, you're in good health." And that sentence, "You're in good health," hit harder than any diagnosis ever could, because it wasn't good news. Not to me. It was confirmation that everything I believed was a lie, that my entire identity, the one they built for me, wasn't mine. When I got home, my mom asked where I'd been. I said the library. She nodded, distracted, already moving to fold laundry. She didn't see the way my hands shook. Or maybe she did and chose not to care. I went straight to my room and locked the door, something I hadn't dared to do in years. And I sat there, alone with the truth. I was healthy, and they had stolen that from me. Not just with lies and pills and pity, but with years, with silence, with a story they wrote over the top of my real one. And now I wanted it back. People always say the truth will set you free. What they never tell you is that before it frees you, it ruins everything. It destroys the floor you've been standing on. And it turns every memory into evidence. After the doctor told me I was healthy, I didn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling for hours, replaying my entire life like a courtroom transcript. Every cough, every fainting spell, every time I was told, "Take it easy." I questioned all of it. Was I ever actually sick? Or was every symptom manufactured, planted in my mind by repetition? But I didn't want feelings. I wanted facts. So I went hunting. I waited until my parents left for a quick run to the store. Together. That alone was rare. Usually one of them stayed behind, just in case I needed something. But this time, they both went, and I didn't waste a second. I started in the hallway. The cabinet. The one with the locked drawer. It wasn't locked. I don't know if they forgot, or if they trusted me that much. Maybe they thought I was still too obedient, too conditioned to ever snoop. And maybe I would have been before. But now? I pulled the drawer open and found files, neatly labeled folders, medical history, tax documents, insurance claims. My hands were shaking before I even touched the first page. At the very top, there it was. Disability claim. Elise Harper filed under my name. Dated back to when I was 12. Resubmitted and reapproved every few years. It listed a vague, chronic heart condition. There were doctor names I didn't recognize, clinics I'd never been to. But what hit me hardest wasn't just the lie, it was the amount. Over the years, they had received more than $200,000. All under the premise that I was permanently disabled, that I couldn't work, couldn't function independently, that I needed a full-time caregiver, which, according to the claim, was my mother. I sat down on the floor, it felt like someone had emptied my entire life into a spreadsheet. Like every missed opportunity, every no I'd been handed growing up, had a price tag. My stolen adolescence, my caged adulthood, my entire identity, all quantified and reimbursed. I dug deeper. Tucked inside the folder was another document, a letter addressed to my father, from a law firm. It thanked him for his ongoing compliance with the terms of the long-term policy and reminded him of the upcoming audit required to maintain benefits. An audit. They weren't just lying to me. They were lying to a system, and they were good at it. That's when I noticed something else. A second insurance policy, not just for disability, but for life. My life. It was a joint policy, one that paid out a massive sum in the event of early death due to medical complications. I felt my stomach twist. I was worth more to them sick than healthy. And more than that, I was worth something dead. That was when I stopped seeing them as misguided parents. They were thieves, liars, fraudsters, and I was their product. I closed the drawer and returned everything exactly as I found it. I didn't want them to know. Not yet. I needed time. A plan. That night, I smiled at dinner. I thanked my mom for the soup. I laughed at one of my dad's dry jokes. But something in me had calcified, hardened. I didn't care why they did it. I didn't want to hear some speech about sacrifices or desperation or doing the best they could. There was no justification for robbing someone of their entire life, because that's what they did to me. And now, I was going to take it back. Every stolen moment, every cent, every word they ever used to keep me quiet. But I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't scream. I had learned from the best how to manipulate the narrative, how to keep things quiet, how to appear harmless. I would take the same tools they used against me and turn them into a weapon. I've always believed that betrayal makes you colder. But it doesn't. Not really. It sharpens you. It teaches you the difference between what people say and what they hide behind their smiles. After I found the insurance papers, I spent days moving through the house like a ghost. I was careful not to change anything. Not my routines, not the way I spoke, not the way I breathed. I still sat at the table at exactly 7. Still took the same pills they handed me. Still thanked them for every false kindness. But behind every gesture, I was cataloging, collecting details like ammunition. I couldn't go to the police yet. I knew that. They'd been doing this for more than a decade. They had documents, systems, lies polished over years. And me? I was just the girl they'd trained not to ask questions. I needed someone who would believe me without flinching. Someone who could help me build a wall of truth so thick they couldn't bury it. That someone was Mia. We'd grown up 2 houses apart. She was the first person I ever told that I wanted to travel someday. The first person who looked at me like I wasn't fragile. We had drifted after high school, mostly because my parents had found new ways to isolate me. But I still had her number. I texted her on a gray Wednesday. Just one line. "Can we talk? It's important." She replied in less than a minute. "Always." We met at a small diner off the highway. It wasn't special, but it was quiet, and most importantly, far enough from town that no one we knew would walk in. She hugged me the second I stepped through the door. I didn't realize how long it had been since someone held me without calculation. I almost cried right there in the entryway. We slid into a booth, ordered coffee, and sat in silence for a while. She didn't rush me. She never had. When I finally spoke, my voice was low. "I'm not sick, Mia." She frowned. "What?" I told her everything. The conversation I'd overheard, the doctor's appointment, the files, the insurance money. I didn't spare a single detail, because I needed someone else to carry the weight of this truth. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking so hard that my spoon clinked against the mug like a bell. She didn't look at me with disbelief. She looked furious. "Jesus, Elise," she whispered. "They've been doing this for how long?" "Since I was 12. Mia leaned back, her jaw tight, her knuckles pale against the coffee cup. "They built your whole life on a lie." I nodded, my throat burning. "I need proof. Real proof. Something no one can deny." She didn't hesitate. "Then we'll get it." There was no judgment, no pity, just quiet, unwavering loyalty. The kind my parents had spent years convincing me didn't exist. We spent hours planning. First step, make copies of everything in that cabinet. Every claim, every signature, every fake diagnosis. But not just paper, dates, numbers, the story behind the story. Second step, get my medical history directly from the insurance company. If the doctors had no records, but claims had been filed, that was evidence of fraud. Third step, track where the money went. My parents didn't live lavishly, but there were things I hadn't questioned before. Vacations I hadn't been invited to, a savings account I'd once overheard them whisper about. By the time the waitress came by to refill our coffee, my fear had started to transform into something new. Not rage, not yet. Resolve. When I got home that night, everything looked the same. The hallway light was still too dim. The kitchen still smelled like lemon disinfectant. But now I was no longer part of the lie. I was standing outside of it, looking in. I walked past my mother, who was sitting at the table clipping coupons like nothing in the world could ever touch us. She smiled at me, that gentle practice smile, the same one she'd used to keep me small for years. And for the first time in my life, I smiled back knowing something she didn't. She thought she'd built the perfect trap. But I'd already started to take it apart. Mia brought the scanner. I brought the gloves. We parked a block away from my house, Not because I was afraid of being seen, but because I knew what fear looked like, and I couldn't afford it anymore. We walked up the driveway like two ordinary girls coming home from class. Only this time I wasn't walking in as a daughter. I was walking in as a witness. My parents were out again. Doctor's appointment, ironically, probably using my name. Their absence gave us a 2-hour window, maybe less. I had rehearsed every movement in my head like a heist. I knew exactly which drawer, which folder, which page. We didn't talk. There was no time for small talk now. We moved quickly, efficiently. Folder by folder, I handed Mia the contents, and she scanned them silently onto a flash drive we'd encrypted earlier that day. We copied letters from the insurance company, addressed to my father, detailing ongoing benefits for Elise Harper's permanent disability, fake doctor's notes with typed signatures from physicians I'd never met, recertification forms that described symptoms I didn't have, shortness of breath, episodes of fainting, limited mobility, even handwritten progress journals, clearly penned by my mother, tracking symptoms I had never experienced. It was surreal, reading your own biography in a language you didn't write. The story of my life as told by liars, a performance polished over years. And I had played my part perfectly. But one document stood out. It was a notarized form, a renewal document from 5 years ago, with my signature at the bottom. Except I never signed it. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the curves of the handwriting. It looked like mine, but smoother, controlled, deliberate, forged. I handed it to Mia. "This is fake." She narrowed her eyes. "That's a felony." We took pictures, close-ups, backups of backups. Mia even suggested we upload the files to a secure cloud server with time-stamped access logs, in case anything happened to the flash drive. "Redundancy is our friend," she said, not looking up. I realized then how serious she was. She wasn't just helping a friend, she was building a case, a legal one, the kind that could dismantle a system brick by brick, and we weren't done yet. In the back of the drawer, hidden under financial records, we found a folder labeled simply ELH Trust. I froze. My initials. Inside, a bank account under my name. Opened when I was 14. Co-managed by my parents, regular deposits, all traced back to disability payments. But what stopped me cold was the balance. $0. The account had been emptied 6 months ago. All of it. Gone. I did the math in my head. The timing matched perfectly with the cruise my parents took last spring. The one I wasn't invited to. The one they said was a gift from a friend. My entire life funded their vacations. I wasn't their daughter. I was their income stream. And the moment I became inconvenient, they'd drain me dry and move on. I backed away from the drawer, nausea crawling up my throat. Mia noticed. "Hey," she said gently. "You're okay. We've got what we need." I nodded, but the truth was, I wasn't okay. I would never be okay again in the way I had been before all this. But that was fine. Because okay was an illusion they built to keep me docile. I didn't want okay, I wanted the truth. We packed everything up, restored the drawer exactly as we found it, and left without a trace. Not a single paper out of place. Not a single light left on. Back at Mia's place, we backed up the files again. This time onto a physical hard drive locked in a safe. We began cataloging everything. Dates, descriptions, how each item connected to the others. We built a timeline, a pattern, a motive. By the end of the night, I was looking at the story of my life laid out across her bedroom wall like a crime scene. Which I realized it was. And the suspects were my parents. But this wasn't the end. This wasn't justice. This was only the beginning. Because now, I had evidence. But I needed something stronger. Something undeniable. And to get that, I would have to go face to face with the people who built the lie, and force them to look me in the eye. I didn't walk into the kitchen planning to confront them that night. But something shifted. Maybe it was the way my dad looked at me when I said I'd be going out alone later. Maybe it was the flicker of something in his eyes, not concern, but calculation. Or maybe it was because I finally saw them clearly. Not as parents, not as protectors, but as people who had made a decision to sacrifice my freedom for their comfort, to use my name as a currency, and to pretend, for years, that love looked like control. So I said it. I have a doctor's appointment next week. A real one. At the hospital. My mom's spoon clinked against her bowl. Why? Full checkup. Thought I'd get a second opinion. You know, since I've never actually met my cardiologist. The silence after that was different from all the silences before. This one wasn't awkward or confused. It was defensive, tense, almost afraid. My father lowered his fork. You don't need to waste money on that. I won't, I said simply. Insurance covers it. They looked at each other, subtle but enough. I smiled, gently, falsely, and sipped my water. War doesn't always begin with shouting. Sometimes it begins with politeness that tastes like poison. That night, they knocked on my bedroom door. My mom came in first, sat on the edge of my bed like she used to when I was a kid, pretending to be sick just to skip school. Only this time, she was the one pretending. Elise, she said softly, we've always just wanted what's best for you. Funny how what's best for me never looked like independence, or ambition, or truth. I didn't reply. She continued. It's scary, the world out there. You've been through so much. It's normal to question things when you're feeling overwhelmed. I raised an eyebrow. Is that what this is? Me being overwhelmed? She smiled sadly. You're young. People make mistakes when they don't understand how complicated everything really is. That word, complicated, was her favorite shield. When the truth got too close, she'd always wrap it in soft language. Complicated. Misunderstood. Too much pressure. I kept my voice even. I understand more than you think. A beat. She hesitated. Then she reached out to hold my hand, like she used to when she'd walk me to bed as a child. But I didn't take it. And that's when I saw it. The fear, not panic, not guilt. Fear of losing control. My father spoke from the doorway. You need to be careful about throwing around accusations, Elise. There it was. The first crack in the mask. I turned toward him slowly. I haven't accused anyone of anything. His jaw tightened. Good. He left the room first. My mother followed seconds later. They didn't say goodnight, and I didn't sleep, because now the game had changed. They knew I knew, and I knew they were scared. The next day, they were different. Softer. Smiling too much. Making my favorite meals. Offering to take me shopping, to get out of the house for a bit. Classic misdirection. But I didn't fall for it. I watched. Listened. Documented. Every glance. Every whisper behind closed doors. Every suspicious phone call. They were scrambling, trying to regain control without tipping their hand. Too late. Mia and I had already built a timeline, a database, a backup drive stored in a separate location. We weren't just gathering information now. We were preparing a submission. We'd already spoken to a lawyer, someone Mia knew from a nonprofit that helped victims of guardianship abuse. She'd seen cases like mine before, not common, but real, and always wrapped in the same thing: silence. The lawyer reviewed our materials, then looked me dead in the eyes and said, "What they've done isn't just unethical. It's criminal." Those words stayed with me. Criminal. It made everything feel heavier and clearer. I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was trying to undo a crime committed over years, one document at a time. Back home, my parents grew more cautious. I stopped getting mail addressed to me. My mom guarded her phone like it held state secrets. My dad erased his browser history so thoroughly it was almost funny. They were covering their tracks. But they didn't realize I'd already been ahead of them for weeks. What they didn't know was that I'd opened a new bank account, transferred every dollar I'd earned from the part-time remote job I'd taken in secret. What they didn't know was that I'd changed the password on the family Wi-Fi and created an admin log that captured every device that connected. What they didn't know was that I was done being their dependent. The final move would be mine. And when it landed, it wouldn't be loud. It would be precise, measured, devastating. Because I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for the truth. And this time, I was going to make sure they couldn't run from it. The day the letters arrived, I was already sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop screen and the folder titled Evidence, Final Submission. I had rehearsed this moment in my head more times than I could count, but nothing could prepare me for the way reality expanded in that instant and swallowed everything I knew. It was early morning. I'd made coffee for myself and left a mug on the coaster beside the legal pad where I'd detailed every transaction, every forged signature, every holiday I was never allowed to attend. The air in my apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle I refused to extinguish until the truth was out. Then, a discreet ping. An email, unremarkable except for the word audit in the subject line. And then another, and another. They came in waves. Notifications from insurance firms, legal departments reaching out, subpoenas emailed. My heart jolted, then stilled. This was real. The trap I'd laid was closing. I watched the screen, breath shallow. My parents' entire network of lies was collapsing in real time, and I was at the switch pulling the lever. Before long, my phone rang. I didn't answer. It was my sister, Vanessa. I didn't answer again. The messages followed. Please, apologies, threats. Fix this. You owe us. Everything will be destroyed. All of it arrived in a blur of choreography I'd seen before. But now I sat back and watched. I no longer flinched. Hours later, I got a text. Dad's accountant called. Your father is being asked to appear. My face tightened. I realized I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Not because I was waiting for victory, but because I was watching consequences ripple outward from a quiet room where only I and my mug sat. The dinner invitation came by way of my grandmother, Eleanor. She asked me to join the family at the country club meeting room. Something about patching the family reputation. I told her I had prior commitments. I did not tell her I was avoiding the place, because this time I didn't want to run toward them. I wanted them to come toward me. At night, I slept poorly. Not because I couldn't, but because the next morning I had scheduled a meeting at our old house, the one my parents still lived in. I had arranged it as casually as possible. I'm going to pick up some old books. I'll stop by around noon. They said okay, of course they did. I was still the daughter who knocked and got permission. Until I wasn't. When I arrived, I carried a folder. Thick, weighty. But I placed it inside the seat next to me in the car before I rang the doorbell. They opened the door and stood side by side, my father looking worn, my mother's eyes barely meeting mine. Their posture changed immediately when I walked past them into the house without waiting to be invited. My grandma Eleanor was also there, apparently summoned to keep peace. She gave me a sad little smile and led me to the old living room where we'd watched TV as children. I sat on the couch. They did not join me. My father hovered. My mother sat near the window, knitting something meaningless. The room smelled the same: lemon air freshener, fabric of upholstery faded, windows partially open though it was winter. I placed the folder on the coffee table. I didn't look up. I simply said, I've given your lawyers copies. I've given mine. From this point forward, you have 1 week to repay every dollar taken, plus interest, or I release this publicly. My voice was calm, cold, not angry, not triumphant, just unwavering. My mother put down the knitting. She looked at me, real, raw. Elise, she whispered. My father didn't speak. He stared at his hands. My grandmother cleared her throat softly. We can talk about this. I nodded. Yes. I had already defined the terms. 1. Full restitution. 2. Full access to my records. 3. Termination of any control you claim over me. 4. Written acknowledgement of the fraud to the insurers. 5. Therapy, or else I walk entirely away. Those were the terms. I didn't need to say them aloud. I had sent them in the folder. They were printed, signed by me, copies for everyone. Silence pressed down. My father looked up. "You'll ruin this family," he said quietly. I met his gaze. "You already have." The next few days were brutal. Not because of what I did, but because of what they did. They began mobilizing. Legal calls, private investigators, the country club board being informed, neighbors whispering, my father's business partner messaging me, apologizing, my mother posting vague statuses about family hardship, Vanessa turning up on social media, triumphant snaps from LA. I watched. I did not engage. The weight of it came at once one afternoon when I was stopped by a neighbor at the grocery store. She said, "I'm so sorry, Elise." I had no idea. I nodded. No words. That's how I'd always been acknowledged, with pity. Now I accepted acknowledgement without needing apology. Late that evening, I found the letter from the insurance company addressed to my mother. Notice of termination of benefits for claimant Elise Harper due to improved condition. I opened it. Ran my finger down the lines. Improved condition. My family had maintained the lie until it practically unraveled itself. And the kicker? They asked for repayment of previously paid benefits, not just for the future, for years gone by. I felt satisfaction, yes, but also exhaustion, because this wasn't a simple victory. It was metamorphosis. At home, my mother opened the door to my apartment. She asked to come in. I said no. I told her we could meet at the cafe across town. She cried. Real tears. Not the practiced ones anymore. She asked if I was hurt, if I wanted help. But I had no words. I was done with her help. I was aligning with myself. I told her I'd published my schedule online, my appointments, my job hours, my bank transfers. I asked for full transparency if she wanted any contact. She didn't answer. I left it there. For the first time in my life, I slept and didn't wake thinking about my parents. I woke thinking about me, my own apartment, my chosen life, my voice, my terms. But the collapse wasn't over. Because once you expose a web of deceit, you can't just walk away. You're always looking back. You're always listening. My legal team called. There's potential for criminal charges. The statute of limitations may be extended if we proceed. I absorbed that with a calm I didn't expect. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about accountability. Midnight came, and I sat by the window in my living room. The city lights blinked. I traced them with my eyes. I felt smaller than ever, but stronger than I ever had. They'd lost access to me, to my name, to the story they'd written about me. And I had taken it back. The house I grew up in remained standing. My parents still lived there. The sofa where I sat as a child still had its indentations. The hallway still smelled of lemon. But everything inside had changed. The trust, the roles, the contract, all dissolved with the last signature I'd overnighted to their lawyer. In the morning, I would move forward, not to rebuild what was broken there, but to build something new, something I owned, something unshakable. My parents would face consequences. My sister might too. The world would bear witness, and I would finally begin the life I'd been denied, because I was no longer their project. I wasn't their disabled daughter. I wasn't their invisible caretaker. I was Elise, and I was free. I opened my eyes to a silence I had never owned before. The apartment around me was ours now, mine and Lily's, and the hum of the air conditioner, the faint creak of the floorboards, the way sunlight floated in like an invitation rather than a warning, all felt new. I was 28, and for the first time I woke up without feeling like I was borrowed from someone else's story, someone else's agenda. It took months to get here, months of gathering documents, of watching the collapse, of holding myself steady while the family I once believed in fractured around me. I learned more about betrayal than I ever wanted to know, but I also learned a deeper truth. Freedom isn't won with noise. It's claimed quietly when no one else is watching. The lawsuit was filed in late April. The summons arrived in May. By June, my parents had lost the disability payments, the trust account was frozen, and the insurance companies were auditing every claim back 10 years. The letters came in thick stacks. I read them on the kitchen table, next to the mug where I used to drink decaf because they worried about my heart rate. The difference now? This mug was normal coffee. Real coffee. I wasn't limited anymore. My grandmother, Eleanor, called me one morning. Her voice sounded aged, worn, but relieved. She said she'd been talking to my father's business partner. He was distancing himself now. He couldn't be part of a company whose owner was under investigation. She apologized for not believing me sooner. I told her something I had learned. Belief isn't enough. Acknowledgement is the starting line, not the finish. I didn't go back to visit the house. I didn't want to walk through the hallway that smelled like lemon air freshener anymore. Instead, I sent the folder, the one I'd placed on the coffee table, the one with signatures, trust documents, bank account sheets, and I left. The old house remained for them. The life I built would be mine. I started taking night classes in business management, work that I'd never been allowed to consider. My health was fine. My last checkup confirmed it. And I was building something new, not because of what they said about me, but because of what I said for myself. I'd launched a small consulting firm that assists people who've been taken advantage of by family or financial guardianship. I named it Phoenix Rise Advisory. The irony wasn't lost on me, and every day I walked into the office with a badge that said Founder and CEO. Because the daughter who was once told she could barely handle a part-time job now ran a business. Let's be honest, there were nights I cried, nights I missed what I thought I had. The whispered get better in hospital beds, the controlled meals, the shielding from normal life. In some twisted way I had been protected. It just turned out I wasn't the fragile one they said I was, and the protection was a cage. But I don't resent it anymore. I learned from it. I harvested the lessons. Here are the lessons I carry. Know your value, even when no one else does. Boundaries are not punishments. They're declarations. Silence covers a lot of lies, but truth doesn't need a voice to be heard. I walk past a locksmith this afternoon and smile at the lock on the door of my office. I installed it myself. I imagine every closed door I once believed I couldn't cross, and all the doors I've walked through since then. When my mother texted me, "Let's have dinner. Family always." Please, I didn't reply, because I knew that family meant what I had accepted before: demands, invisibility, sacrifice. I didn't hate her. I just separated her from the idea of family that honored me. When my father's accountant asked if I'd drop the case for a new investment banquet, I hung up, because the offer wasn't new money. It was old money, recast as bribery. And when my sister, Vanessa, changed her number and moved coast to coast without looking back, I didn't track her. Because I'd already tracked myself. I'd already followed the path out. 3 weeks ago, I took my grandmother out to brunch. She held my hand and said, "You gave us all a hard lesson." I nodded. She looked at me and then at the view over the city skyline. And perhaps a good one. I realized I wasn't just building a business. I was building a legacy, one of autonomy, clarity, and respect. I was no longer care-dependent. I was caregiving, not from the side of weakness, but from the side of strength. My office phone rang this morning, first call of the day, a former CEO whose company went bankrupt because of a family scam. He said, "Elise, thank you for giving me a voice." And I remembered how long I wasn't heard. Now I heard hundreds. So here I am, the daughter who wasn't sick, the daughter who they claimed couldn't handle life, the daughter who took back every signature, every check, every whisper, and I'm free. If you're watching this, if you've ever been told you could not, you were weak, you didn't matter, know this: you do matter. Your story is not defined by the chapters someone else wrote for you. It's defined by the one you choose to write now. If you've stayed with me through every chapter, I thank you. But I also ask you one thing. Click the subscribe button. Because this story isn't over. Not just mine, but yours. And I promise the next chapter will be about possibility, not survival. Don't miss it. Tell your truth. Claim your space. Walk through those doors they said you couldn't open. And remember, freedom doesn't ask permission. Thank you for coming this far. Chapter 10 marks the end of what was, The beginning of what always was meant for you. Subscribe now, and let's keep writing.